The Mega Man X series was meant to end after the 5th entry, but for some reason, most likely dollar signs in some exec's eyes, we got 3 more titles after that. X, 6, and 7 are some of the most infamous Mega Man titles of all time, with only Battle Network 4 being able to compete on the stage of the worst. But what of X8? This is one of the more overlooked Mega Man games, and after the previous 2 stinkers, who can blame people for passing on this one? That does beg the question though. Was X8 another dumpster fire and soulless cash grab, or did Capcom manage to turn things around just in time for everyone to stop caring? I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I've once again managed to collect all the Hunter medals for one of the X titles. So with that under my belt, let's finally discuss the final mainline X title. I'll start with the thing that will probably cause a lot of you to let out a big sigh of relief, and tell you that the game goes back primarily to side-scrolling, the only exceptions being 2 ride chaser levels. For the rest, while the graphics are 3D, the action is not. This gives fans of the series the type of gameplay they're familiar with and likely prefer, while looking nice for the PlayStation 2 and throwing a few neat effects in, though it's not without issues. Sometimes it can be a little hard to tell where the background ends and the foreground begins, which can cause a bit of confusion trying to tell what's the end of a platform or which spikes are a threat and which are just decorative. The spikes themselves are also a little weird in this. In the past, spikes could be pretty unforgiving. I even remember one time touching the side of some instead of the top, and only vaguely, and it's still killing me, so that I'm used to. If you do it here though, you get tractor beamed into said spikes, almost like the game didn't think the hitboxes were convincing enough and needed to really sell you on just how dead you were. I don't think they made the spikes any harsher, the visual effect is just really weird. These are pretty minor complaints though, that I chalk up more to growing pains, balancing 2D action with 3D visuals. The action in X8 is the best we've gotten in some time. The characters play like how you'd expect, and they don't just overwhelm you with enemies to make things harder. They even manage to salvage some of the few good bits from X7, like the team-up system. We'll get into character specifics later, but before starting each stage, you pick 2 characters to play as. I like this because not only does it give you an excuse to try out different people, rather than just choose a favorite and stick with them, but it also cuts back on the need to replay levels, since if you choose the right Reploids, you'd only need to revisit a place that requires all 3 to collect everything, with most only requiring 2, especially if you know cheese. Besides that, some enemies can capture you, and while you can mash out with enough effort, tagging in a partner will instead cause them to rescue you before taking over. When you receive damage, some lost health will stay red in your HP bar, and putting them on the bench temporarily will allow them to recoup it. You can also do a team-up attack. You build up a meter by dealing damage and getting certain power-ups. Unleashing it close enough to an enemy will call in both characters to just unload on them. It tends to do enough to wipe out regular enemies while doing a modest chunk to bosses, and if you whiff it, it doesn't get rid of the special, just puts a cooldown on it until you can try again. It's not powerful enough to break the game, and doesn't recover fast enough to the point where you can just spam it, so it's pretty well balanced. Unlike in the last game where if one person dies, it was the end for both, here that's only the case with insta-death, like Pits and Spikes. If one character falls but the other still has some HP, they swap in, and your double attack meter instead becomes one that will revive a partner with a bit of life if you manage to fill it up. Who doesn't love second chances? There are 3 different difficulty settings, easy, normal, and hard, and these seem to affect things like how far you can boost your stats, how much damage some enemies take, and how tenacious bosses are. Options are always nice. The level designs are back on point. Each one has a specific gimmick, keeping things fresh, and while you can beat any stage with any character, some are better suited to others, so learning the ins and outs of each and planning accordingly is worthwhile. There are also a lot more collectibles in this one, so thoroughly exploring each, minus the final levels which are largely straightforward, can be pretty satisfying, testing both your intuition and ability to pull things off. Maybe your skill with Google too, at points. Most stages also have a quirk where, when you get to a sub-boss, sometimes Vile will pop in instead to interrupt you, keeping you on your toes. And hey, if there's a particular challenge you're having trouble clearing, having Vile replace the encounter could actually be your lucky break. There are a few stinkers here, like the level that has 3 vertical scrolling sections, only broken up by a ventilation shaft with way too many spikes that are sometimes off-screen or covered up by the UI, and the boss, yes, one of the sections happens after you beat them. The stage where you have to chase after a Maverick on a ride chaser in an on-rail shooter where the path forward is vague and it's nigh impossible to beat without upgrading the right thing, and the final stage, which has a lot of spikes with vague hitboxes and dubious placements between background and foreground. Out of the dozen stages though, these are more the exception than the rule, most of them being pretty cool. They even throw in an elevator level, which as a fan of beat 'em ups, I'm a sucker for. Capcom did a terrific job here. Boss battles themselves were pretty standard. You get to the end of the stage and fight a guy after exchanging some brief dialogue. The right weapon giving you an advantage if you came prepared. There is one thing they added to the experience though, giving the boss a powerful move called an overdrive attack. When they use it varies a bit based on difficulty, but on normal, a few hits before you kill them, they'll activate it. The boss is invincible while it's in use, making it your task to just avoid it. They're not powerful enough to completely turn the tide of battle, much like your own team-up attack, and they each tend to last just long enough not to overstay their welcome. I've seen other games do similar things, but make the enemy's super move way too overpowered, to the point where the entire battle pretty much hinges on that one move. So I think what they've done here is very nicely balanced, and most boss encounters are more fun than frustrating. Now for what will likely be the most divisive element of this title, chips and medals. Each character can be powered up by buying chips for them, which you do with the game's currency, medals. There are also a few that are general use, like E-tanks, and some are also one use, like the prickle barrier, which will stop spikes from killing you. A few you can unlock from the get-go, but for most of the good stuff, you need to find the ability to make the chip in the level. With some of the stuff you can unlock, like increased defense or eliminating knockback, you can turn each character into a total powerhouse, and it's good to see some of these things available to everyone, rather than just locking them behind X's armor parts. Though there are two things I could see people taking issue with. First, there are a lot of them, and while a veteran player can probably piece together where most of them are, a few do require a pretty esoteric series of steps. Remember, Google is your friend. More than that though is the expectation to grind. Playing it normally, you might, and it's a pretty big might at that, just barely manage to get a single character up to 100% in a single playthrough. If you want absolutely everything though, you'll really have to put in some work, and as I've said in other videos, it is really weird expecting players to grind in an action game, especially one as fast-paced as this. The game does give you a few ways to mitigate this though. The first are intermissions, which are small sections of levels where you earn medals for your performance. Some go on until you lose, you competing for a high score, and others do terminate. Your mileage may vary with these, some are fun, some feel like a chore, and some have better yields than others. If you ever find yourself needing to make use of these, I'd suggest doing the one with the Ride Chaser in Central White, but you'll still be going for a while if you're looking to get everything. The other method to build yourself up is the New Game Plus, which lets you carry over everything outside of boss weapons. While it's still technically a grind, spreading it out over several playthroughs does make it feel a lot less so. You even get bonuses for doing it, like upgraded armor for each of the main characters, though these do require the person in question to be fully powered up, so again, it comes back to grinding. If you're feeling understandably impatient though, you can type in some codes at the title screen to skip this and get the armor early, so back to game facts. For characters, you have the big three, X, Zero, and Axel. Starting at the end, Axel plays largely like he did in X7, just refined a bit since they didn't need to worry about making him work in 3D this time. He has a gun that can shoot rapidly, and every few shots do break guards if you got somebody with a shield. He can hover for a short time. When a boss is defeated, he gets a new weapon he can swap to that uses his version of the new attack. His transformation ability works like it did before, letting him change into something relatively close to his size for a limited time. Only now the copy shot he needs to use to fell a target hits a bit harder, and he can freely switch to and from the new form as long as he has weapon ammo, instead of just leaving him stuck in a particular one until time runs out. His secret armor, White Axle, lets him hover indefinitely, and the color palette is something I'll discuss in a later video. While I kinda wish his copy ability was more useful, me really only busting it out to get specific collectibles, Axel plays a lot better here than he did in the last game, so I can't really complain too much, at least not on an individual level. Zero has a sword and a double jump, like normal. The big thing with him this time are his multiple weapons, that you find the chips for throughout the levels. Unlike last time, where I complained that it felt like he had a full moveset spread across 3 different types of armaments, Here, he has a full pool of abilities, each weapon just changing the range, power, or in some cases, giving him a variant of the skill instead. While some arms are more situational, you really only needing to break them out to get a specific collectible or for the novelty of it, others seem downright broken. My favorite combination was using the air spin with the glaive, hitting much of the screen and making it so that typically only a boss could get close enough to hit him back. There weren't many problems in the game that spinning couldn't fix. And of course, his secret armor was Black Zero, making his aerial movements a bit better and increasing his power at the cost of defense. Really glad to see Zero playing as I'm used to again, instead of just bringing him along to jump high and play ping pong occasionally. And then there's the main attraction, X. He has a chargeable buster and armor he can assemble to greatly enhance his abilities. There's two this time, the Icarus and Hermes armors, providing different giga attacks, dashes, and charge shots, among others. Unlike in X5 and 6, where you have to assemble the whole set to use them, here you can get each part individually and mix and match parts. Though you do get some bonuses for going with a complete outfit. This lets him charge his specials and just all around makes him the best character in the game, given how much more this lets him expand what he can do. As you would expect, his secret form is the ultimate armor, which is very purple this time around. This gives him not only absurd defense, the charge shot from the fourth armor leaving behind an electric ball on contact that deals damage over time, but an unlimited use of the Nova Strike with just a short cooldown. This takes down all regular enemies in one hit and drops all but the final bosses to 1 HP, just so that they get a chance to use their overdrive. As you can probably imagine, this makes subsequent playthroughs go by pretty quickly. There are 3 Navigators you can choose from, each with a specialty. Lair will give you data on bosses, Palette gives you info on secret paths in the level, and Aelia returns to tell you a bit of both. In New Game Plus, they're also playable, you being able to unlock the one you use the most first in the metal shop, and the other 2 can be bought after that. Each play like one of the main characters, Aelia playing like X, Lair like Zero, and Palette like Axel. This is cool, and like I say, I always love options, but there are a few issues here. First, none of them can get their equivalent special armor, making them lesser from the get-go. It's especially rough for Aelia, who doesn't even get X's standard armor upgrades. Second, while you can get the same chips for them as the boys, you have to rebuy them, and if you already have the male version built up, it can be a little discouraging to have to start from scratch. And third, if you have one of the girls with you, boss dialogue gets cut out, even if they're not the one who's out when you enter a boss room. While it's not the biggest deal, it is a bit of a bummer if you're either trying to get new dialogue or refresh yourself on the story. Overall, it just kinda highlights the bigger problem of X and Zero being the optimal choices throughout the game. There's only a few levels where benching one of them for Axel is the better option. While the variety is there, it almost feels like an illusion of it, and I kinda wish the characters were a bit more balanced. Still though, even if it wasn't implemented ideally, I do love having 6 character choices and like using different combinations for fun, when I'm not being a tryhard on stream. The game doesn't look bad, at least in my opinion. While the 3D graphics might cause a few issues, I never got sick of staring at it, and I think they chose a style that worked well with the PS2's limitations without aging horribly. I also like the designs. The levels each look distinct, and the main characters are still iconic. I also think the Maverick bosses look pretty cool. While I never would have imagined a Vile in military green with thick, wire dreadlocks, I think it works. One oddball thing is that there's this weird lightbulb baby enemy that shows up a lot, almost like they were trying to make it a new mascot, but nothing will ever replace the Met. Then again, maybe I'm reading too much into it. I like the soundtrack for the most part. There's a few tracks that are a bit weaker, but they still kick the pants off of what many other games are working with, and the good ones are really good. The track that plays during the final boss's second form is one of my favorites in the series. The voice acting is also much better than the series has gotten in the past, further convincing me that they put some effort into the game. It's really nice to be able to listen to the dialogue without either needing to change the language or treat the whole thing like a joke. The menus are laid out competently and are never a struggle to use. Overall, the game is well put together. The story is one of the stronger ones in the X series. It focuses largely on new generation Reploids, which have the ability to transform using other Reploids' DNA, including Sigma's. One of these new generation types, Lumine, is in charge of the orbital elevator, the world's gateway to space, and gets kidnapped by Vile early on, kicking off the conflict this time. One of the reasons I like the plot is because it actually addresses past events. It doesn't just overwrite or ignore them for convenience. X is full of self-doubt, like normal, Zero is holding a grudge for being used to create a new strain of Maverick virus in X5, and Axel is the prototype for the new generation Reploids, connecting directly to the point of the last game. They also pace the cutscenes pretty well. Big ones take place during major points in the game, not being too long, having enough going on, and containing pertinent information to hold your attention. There are also small, text box only scenes that take place after each boss clear that give you a bit of insight into what the characters are feeling, while also introducing the new Navigators a bit. And all of them can be skipped with the start button, if you've either seen them before or just plain don't care. I played many a game that insisted on grinding the action to a halt for minutes at a time, for just a bunch of boring text, so I really appreciate how X8 keeps things digestible, relevant, and even skippable, making it feel like my time is being respected. The big reason that I really like the story is kind of a spoiler though, so I'll give you a few seconds, in case you haven't played it and you're beginning to think you might want to give it a try. That enough time? Okay, so I love the shakeup they do at the end of the game, having you fight Sigma like normal, but then having Lumine step in to be the actual final boss. As much as I love Sigma, I can't be the only one thinking that the pattern of some bad guy with glowing blue eyes and a head jewel that's pulling the strings from behind the scenes just to reveal himself as Sigma is getting a little tired. And while it's been hinted at in the past, at least if you read boss profiles, this is the most directly they've addressed that going Maverick might not just be the result of a virus, but an active choice. Being a Nintendo household, my first experience with the events of X8 was actually a plot summary, but if I had played this game blind, I think it would have surprised me. While it was apparent that there was something up with Lumine, I probably would have figured on him being a Dr. Doppel character, being either tricked or taken over by Sigma, with the bald Maverick being the main villain all along. With the way Lumine supplants him at the end, though, I have to wonder what Capcom's plan was for the series after this. If they would have maybe regulated Sigma to either a recurring side villain like Vile or Dynamo, or if they were planning on replacing him altogether. Color me intrigued. I think the biggest mistake Capcom made with the X series was not letting it end with X5, but the second biggest mistake was not continuing it past X8. What we have instead is the worst case scenario, the series having a natural, planned end that was ignored to have 2 terrible games pumped out afterwards, and just when things seemed to be getting put back on track, we're left hanging. X8 is a return to what worked, with a few good ideas from X7 being kept, and a little bit of experimenting to deliver a game that's a little rough at spots, but ultimately pretty darn good. It's very promising without the promise ever being delivered on in a follow-up title. The story itself is in a similar position, addressing past plot points while possibly wrapping up some threads and spinning new ones. If we ever get an X9 and it either downplays or straight up ignores what this game was building to, especially with Axel, I will be extremely disappointed. I really wish X9 had come out just a few years after this. I guess what I'm saying is, if you're a fan of Mega Man X, but skipped this one after being turned off by X6, 7, or both, I really think this entry is worth a look. While it might not be the most polished in the series, it does a lot of things right and it does not deserve the cold shoulder. As for me, replaying this has given me a lot to think about, and I'm planning on doing 2 follow-up videos. One a deep dive on Axel, and the other being what I want from an X9. If that sort of thing interests you, maybe consider subscribing, but for right now, thanks for watching, and I'd love to hear what you yourself think of this currently final game in the X series.